topic for today is Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, Mishnah 4, in the middle of the Mishnah. Now, this needs to be explained. How come in the middle of the Mishnah, all of a sudden we have somebody else speaking? That's why in some editions they actually split this Mishnah in half. If you remember, the one who was speaking before was Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Yehuda Nasi, the redactor of the Mishnah, of Yehuda Nasi. This is his son, who's also the head of the Sanhedrin. All of a sudden, we're going back approximately 100 years to Hillel. Why all of a sudden does Hillel show up out of supposedly nowhere? Not only that, but if you check in Avot Rabbi Natan, and Avot Rabbi Natan is sort of like, it's written around the time of the Talmud, latest the time of the Geonim. So it's sort of like the Gemara, if you want, on the Mishnah of Masechet Avot, Avot Rabbi Natan. So if you check in Avot Rabbi Natan, you'll notice that all these Mishnayot are missing. Avot Rabbi Natan goes from chapter 1, the Mishnayot that talk about Hillel and Shammai, the last one being chapter 1, Mishnah 15, and then skips out Rabban Gamliel, which is Mishnah 16, and Shimon, his son, Mishnah 17, and Shimon ben Gamliel, the grandson, Mishnah 18, and also skips out Rabbi Omer in chapter 2, Mishnah 1, Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda in chapter 2, and all the sayings of Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and starts only and also skips out all these Hillels, and only continues with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the 8th Mishnah. So what's going on? What's going on is that according to the order of Avot Rabbi Natan, it's going from Hillel and Shammai, who are the heads of the Sanhedrin before the destruction of the temple in the 1st century, and jumping directly to the main disciple of Hillel, who was Yochanan ben Zakkai, and Yochanan ben Zakkai was the one who established Kerem B'Yavneh with the destruction of the temple. That is the order according to Avot Rabbi Natan. Now it's interesting though that there is a Baraita in Sukkah that says about Yochanan ben Zakkai that he was the term uses smallest, meaning he was the least of the students of Hillel. The greatest of the students of Hillel, according to that source in Sukkah, was Yonatan ben Uziel, and the least of them was Yochanan ben Zakkai. But that's what happens. Even the least of the students, he's the one who perpetuates the Torah with the destruction of the temple. So call him what you want to call him, but he's the one that we will remember because he's the one who established Kerem B'Yavneh after the destruction of the temple and perpetuated the Torah scholarship. However, remember, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is the redactor of the Mishnah. And so for him, it's very important to include his own family lineage within Pirkei Avot. It is possible that, remember, the Mishnayot, even though Yehuda Nasi is the redactor, it's not, there are various collections of Mishnayot that he is taking from. He's not creating the Mishnayot and the Braita. He's just taking from this source of Tanaic sayings and creating the Mishnah out of it. So it could be that Pirkei Avot was already known, but Yehuda Nasi, when he put together Pirkei Avot into a book form as a tractate, he added these various Mishnayot to put his own lineage. Of course, he is descended from Hillel and the head of the Sanhedrin. So to put his own lineage of his family until him. And then he goes back to Yochanan ben Zakkai. This is a possibility when we're trying to understand how the Mishnayot were put together and the fact that this is left out of Avot Rabbi Natan, but not left out of the Mishnah itself. It's an interesting question for those who are in Talmudic research to understand exactly where these chapters came from. And but obviously these chapters are showing the lineage of the family of Yehuda Hanasi, and then it goes back to the student of Hillel, Yochanan ben Zakkai. But before it goes back to the student of Hillel, it also brings before us three sayings of Hillel in order to, as if backtrack, here again sayings of Hillel. Now let's go to Yochanan ben Zakkai. So what are the sayings of Hillel that are brought here? We'll only talk about the first. This one that falls out in the middle of Mishnah Dalet. Hillel says, Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Do not separate yourself from the community. V'al tamin b'atzmacha ad yom motcha. And do not have faith even in yourself until your dying day, because you never know what the outcome of yourself and your ideas will be. You might surprise yourself, both for the good and for the bad. Do not judge your fellow until you understood where they're at, meaning being as if being in their skin. This is a more difficult one. So let's start from the beginning. We have three sayings of Hillel which seem to relate almost geographically to the community, to your fellow, and to yourself. And then two sayings that have to do with time. And both of the sayings that have to do with time seem to connect to the study of Torah, but not necessarily. Let's go over them again. Do not separate yourself from the community. Some interpret this in the negative, meaning don't leave the community in times of sorrow. Elimelech, in the book of Ruth, ran away from Bethlehem because it was a famine. According to the Midrash, he was a rich man and didn't want all these poor people knocking on his door. But if you do not share in the difficult moments of the community, the Talmud says in Tanit, then you will not see its comfort. Only those who shared in the sorrow of crying over Jerusalem will also see its comfort. But it could be also understood that human beings are social beings. We need to be part of the community. By being part of the community, there are a lot of things that you learn also outside your own bubble. Rav Kook writes in one place that sometimes a scholar needs to be in touch with simple people to remove themselves from their scholarly bubble and see what the common sense folk are saying out there. It's a very important angle to understand. And so therefore it says, Al tifrosh min hatzibur. So it could be from the negative, meaning be with the community in its time of sorrow to see its time of comfort. But it could also be, we are social beings, we need this relationship to other people in order to understand the world properly, not just to live in our own four cubits. The second statement of Hillel then is, do not have total faith in yourself until your last day. Al tifrosh min hatzibur, and the same one, al tamid b'atzmacha ad yom motcha. Of course, the Talmud brings the story of a fellow Rabbi Yochanan, who was a high priest, who seemed to be a very righteous person. However, and in his final years, he became a Sadducee. So the Talmud says, you never know. A person can be righteous, and when he's 80 years old, all of a sudden decides to take a different path. So because life has surprises and we can surprise ourselves, you always have to be watching yourself and be critical about yourself. And then hopefully you'll surprise yourself for the good and not for the bad. And then the third thing is not to judge your fellow until you have come to their place. We have a tendency, of course, to justify the wrong things that we do, because if people understood what we went through, then we would understand why we do what we do, right? But when somebody else does it, we don't spend the time to try to think what they went through. That doesn't concern us. Right away we criticize. How could you possibly do such a terrible thing? So it says, try not to be judgmental of your fellow until you understand where they're coming from, until you can put yourself in their skin to understand. And then after you've done that, if you still think there's a place to be judgmental, it's not great to be judgmental anyhow. There's already a judge in heaven. Why do we have to be judgmental? Most people are judgmental. It's an inferiority complex. They don't really want to do what they do, so look at that guy. But if you really want to do what you did, you wouldn't look at the other guy. You would just do it, right? So if somebody give you a free vacation to Florida, you're going to ask why the other guy didn't get it. You'll just go, right? So, anyhow, so you have these three relationships with the community. Important to be in touch with the community. With yourself, sometimes you have to believe in yourself, but you have to be critical of yourself too, because there could be outcomes that you did not expect. So you have to be both critical and believe in yourself, and hope then that the two together will bring positive outcomes and not negative. And also, don't be judgmental about other people, because it's also a statement about yourself. When you see wrong things in other people, you probably saw it in yourself too, as the Baal Shem Tov used to say. Because if you didn't have these shortcomings, you wouldn't notice it in other people. Now, the next ones, the last two have to do with time, and they're a bit unusual. The first one can be interpreted different ways. Al tomar davar, don't say something, she'iev shalishmoa, which cannot be heard, shesofali shama, because it's going to be heard. Okay, what interpretation is like this? Don't say something that you think is so esoteric that nobody's going to understand it. Meaning, don't say something which is difficult for people to understand and say, look, if they're supposed to understand, they'll understand. No. If you are a pedagogue, if you are a teacher, teach it right. It's easy just to say something and say, okay, figure it out yourselves. If you're a pedagogue, if you're a teacher, teach it right. Don't say something which is hard to understand and say that they're going to understand it eventually. It's a wrong approach pedagogically. Interpretation number one. Interpretation number two. Don't say something about somebody else or about yourself which you don't want everybody to know, because you never know. Everybody might find out. Actually, today we understand that better. People always say, don't put something on Facebook that you don't want the whole world to know, because it's not private, even if you think it is. So they're saying, according to this interpretation, is the same thing. Don't say things in secret to somebody thinking that not everybody will find out, because everybody will find out. So you have to be very careful about what you say. So this could be understood one way or another, meaning either you're trying to keep something because you don't want to explain it more, assuming people will understand. They might understand it wrong. And the other way is that don't say secrets that you think one or two people want to share with, because everybody will find out in the end. So you have to think about where you think. But again, it has to do with the process of time and learning. And the second one also, do not say when I have time I will study. Maybe you won't have time. Carpe diem. If you really feel that something is important to study, do it right now. Because in rabbinic thinking, the study of Torah in particular is carpe diem. It's something that we really need to do. Even the halakha, we say that you're allowed to write divrei Torah and chol hamoed because it's davar aved, something which you're going to forget after, right? On chol hamoed, we normally only write things which we really have to. It's like a funny day. It's not exactly a Yom Tov, but it's a little bit of a Yom Tov. So don't say that when I get around to it, I'm going to study. There's certain things you have to push yourself. It's just a truism of life. After you've gone over a certain age and you're not in high school and you're not in university, you're not studying anymore, you've got to push yourself to study, because the vicissitudes of life take us away from that. That's why it says, Kava itim la Torah. Designate times for Torah study. And the Vilna Gaon explains that the word designate, kava, comes from the word to steal, as it says in Malachim, Hikba Adem Elohim, meaning you have a lot of things on your plate, so steal time for the study of Torah. So, because this is going to push you forward, because the ideas of the mind are the ones that, in the end of the day, are going to affect the body. So these 5 sayings of Hillel in this one Mishnah, because there's 2 other ones which will follow, but not today. But these 5 sayings, first 3 relate to what I call relationships of the community, yourself, and the other. The other is not like the community. It's looking at it as a person, not as a collective. And then the last 2 have to do with time-bound issues, which are interesting. The first one, about what happens when you say something and the way it's going to disseminate. So when you say something deep, it might disseminate the wrong way because it's complicated. And when you say something secret, everybody will find out because, by the way, that might also be distorted. So you have to be very, very careful because that's also, especially it might be dramatized. And the second one is just don't say when I get around to, I'll study, because that's the way of life. We don't get around to it unless we push ourselves and make it a priority. Now, as I was saying, all these ideas of Hillel seem to be something which Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is bringing in as a connecting theme between what originally was the early Hillel statements of chapter 1 and what's going to be Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So it'll be interesting when we go through the three Mishnayot to look back and understand why these three Mishnayot were included specifically at this point as this new introduction of Hillel. And also notice that Hillel is being reintroduced, but not Shammai. It's just Hillel and then his student. And of course, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi being descended from Hillel, there is a special connection to Hillel as well. So this is basically what I wanted to say about this particular Mishnah, and we will continue next week then with Mishnah 5, which in some books is Mishnah 6 because Mishnah 4 was made into two Mishnayot in some books, and try to understand that second topic of Hillel, Hillel Hanasi. Shalom, shalom.